is clear but difficult to operationalize. Okay, so from a diplomatic perspective, and it's important to underscore, it looks the same, but they're not exactly the same. One China principle and one China policy. Beijing's perspective is one China principle, which asserts that there's one. Of course, that's one China. Two, that the sovereign authority of that one China is the CCP, Chinese Communist Party. Three, that ultimately peaceful unification of Taiwan, of China, I mean Taiwan, Island, and mainland China into one under the legal authority of the CCP. The one China policy is, if you like, it's not the Chinese position, it's the position of other sovereign countries who say and acknowledge People's Republic of China claim about one policy, they accept, but they do not necessarily endorse it, but they acknowledge and try to keep it. They also agree that the CCP is the authority, but they maintain, they recognize the de facto policy or the fact of the ground that's in Taiwan that operates a democratic Taiwan, operates a different system. And so the problem has always been, how do you acknowledge Beijing's claim and deal with the real world situation of engaging with Taiwan? And let's not forget that the evolution started after the war. It was actually the Republic of China that was first recognized in the UN. It flipped 1949 to 1970 when by 1950 the Republic of China government is in Taiwan. But 1971 when the UN-China agreement happened and the United Nations now expelled them from the United Nations. Today, de facto, almost all countries in the world acknowledge the People's Republic of China and the CCP as the authority. But if you look at policies, how they respond to, for example, many of them in the Asian countries, depending on their approach to China, either no deal with Taiwan or economic processes. So what we have today is Taiwan deploying investment and trade framework agreements, TIFA if you like, to deal with these countries. And the question is, a country like Nigeria, one of these countries, including where Japan is more bullish, Japan has been more bullish within the Taiwan, but the rest have dealt with not a level of diplomacy, but a level of trade and investment. And some, like in the Pacific, have put up what they call representative offices, which is basically, some of them operating like quasi embassies, some of them basically outposts. So the question is, how should Africa and particularly Nigeria deal with this issue? And I want to be very clear about it. The consensus is for one China principle, so as we say. But state practice always ambiguous. What we call strategic ambiguity in diplomacy, meaning they acknowledge, but at the same time they engage, because the reality of statecraft requires some degree of ambiguity. So the question we ask ourselves, should we foreclose ambiguity and advance in the way of straight one China principle, which will exclude all kinds of trade, and I had people very well, all kinds of engagement with Taiwan. So that's the question on the ground. Again, if you look at China has played very important role in Africa, very important role in stimulating. When I used to be the foreign policy, you go to the UN, the AU office, you see the the footprint of China's in Africa, if you look to infrastructure across Africa, you see China has been maybe arguably in this half of this decade, half of this century, arguably has been even more than the US and the British Europeans in first-time development in Africa. But at the same time, and this is the way the rubber meets the road, Taiwan is improving or trying to promote itself. For example, the Taiwan Foundation for the Human Rights or for Democracy and Human Rights has been trying to sneak in and promote development, human rights in some part of the world. And countries are kind of being tempted to accept their support. And the question is whether take the support from a non-sovereign, now from a Chinese perspective and from a global consensus, not a sovereign in that sense. How do you calibrate engagement in order to run foul of the international law of sovereign relationship? At the same time, also deal with the fact that there is some elephant in that room. And I think that the strategic ambiguity that we need to deal with. My prescription would be that African countries have a history with keeping territories intact. The premise of which Africa use AOU and AU is that territories should remain as they are. So it aligns with the Chinese, with the People's Republic of China's position, which is that's one China. And internal conflicts or internal settlements in that territory should not be taken to represent, separate statehood. The same way we argue about whether it is Biafra or Dua or other formations. But the reality, as we know, in the age of self-determination and self-expression, is much more complex. So the point, therefore, will be this. And to end, I will say, one of the things that Taiwan is doing as bad is what we call sovereignty for rent. You acknowledge our sovereignty, and that's probably what Eswatini did. Sovereignty for rent. You get paid, acknowledge. But that's not sustainable in the world. And there have been 5 positions, let me end with this, about this one China principle. There's a team, what we call Team Taiwan, very few people who say Taiwan, this is the Republic of China, is where we are. There's status quo, those who acknowledge the one China policy, but at the same time, they say they're not up to issue around unification. There are those that are called mixed signalers. They signal that they agree with the one China policy, but at the same time, they acknowledge that Taiwan is a distinct political system and people. That is the Beijing leaning, those who acknowledge one China policy, but they're not fully talking about reunification. Of course, the last group is the Beijing backers. They acknowledge the one principle, but also acknowledge reunification. So what should be Africa's position? I guess there's going to be a conversation after this presentation and to know whether we should move from where we are more of Beijing leaning, but not necessarily for reunification, or where we maintain strategic ambiguity, mixed signal. We acknowledge these principles, but we go back down and also deal with Taiwan in trade, using trade and investment agreements. Where should we go? My position is that, as a foreign policy person, that diplomacy, should never have any diplomatic engagement with Taiwan, but we should calibrate our trade agreement to ensure that it does not contradict the core principle, but at the same time takes cognizance of the elephant in the room. Thank you so much.